Today's gospel reading, Jesus stands before Pilate, accused of claiming kingship. Jesus redefines kingship, declaring his kingdom is not of this world. Unlike worldly powers rooted in domination and fear, Christ's reign is grounded with truth, justice, and peace, challenging oppressive systems. This message remains profoundly relevant today. Our world continues to grapple with abuses of power that result in violence, systematic injustice, and the dehumanization of marginalized groups. Politicians and leaders often perpetuate harm by weaponizing language to justify exclusion or exploitation. These harmful narratives find echoes in the words and actions of people around us, our neighbors, friends, relatives, or even strangers in our communities. As followers of Christ, we are called to reject such complacency and actively live out the values of God's kingdom. It goes beyond inaction. It includes allowing others to demean someone because of their gender, ethnicity, education, or citizenship status. Christ's example compels us to stand against injustice, fostering relationships rooted in respect, dignity, and love. By embodying God's transformative truth, we witness the reality of the kingdom on earth. Jesus' declaration to Pilate, "My kingdom is not from this world," redefines power. His kingdom does not rely on coercion, intimidation, or fear, but operates through compassion, justice, and truth. Jesus' life deviates profoundly from worldly systems built on fear and control. He did not force his will upon others or threaten eternal punishment, but embodied transformative love and justice. Pilate represents the oppressive systems of power today. Political structures prioritizing authority over humanity. Wealth accumulated at the expense of the vulnerable, and appointment of unethical leaders to maintain dominance. Pilate's involvement in injustice reflects modern society's harmful patterns, highlighting such systems' widespread nature. In contrast, Jesus embodies nonviolence and truth, showing how these principles can dismantle oppression. His life and ministry illustrate a call to action, to recognize the divine worth of every person, confront systems of control and fear, and uplift the marginalized. Jesus is a child who challenges unjust norms. The countless children who risk losing their own meals for the week with potential cuts to our education system. The person begging for food on the corner, and the immigrant or refugee seeking refuge only to face xenophobia and shame. Through his example, Christ invites us into a life rooted in justice, compassion, and restoration of human dignity. Jesus' testimony to the truth calls his followers to live as active witnesses. Truth-telling involves courageously addressing the lies and injustices that sustain systems of harm. It means advocating for those silenced, naming inequity, and resisting complacency. As a reminder, a popular meme captures the sentiment that Jesus may be speaking about us. If you have social media, you've probably seen it, where Jesus is on the side of the picture, and it's quoted as saying, "Many of you sitting at the tables, I asked you to flip." Think about that. Jesus is calling us out that we're sitting at the table instead of flipping the table. What does that say to you? How does it speak to you? Now, there are times where we should sit at the table, but there are many times we do need to flip the table. Living truth requires boldness, integrity, and a relentless commitment to justice. It also reminds me of a recent story that I heard. Now, don't necessarily say this is a true story, but it's a story nonetheless. Apparently, an assistant federal prosecutor had a court date for a ticket that she felt was unjust. So she got up early, planned accordingly, but on the way to the courthouse, her boss called her because of a case that they were doing that needed her immediate analysis and response. So she parked, read it up, summarized it, and sent it to her boss. But what happened is she was late to court by 15 minutes. Court proceedings had already started. She, as quietly as possible, walked in, and the judge, being a white man, older, immediately looked at her and called her out on being late. Didn't give her an opportunity to explain why she was late. He just honed in on her and started basically belittling her. Now you notice I said the color of the skin of the judge. Now, imagine what the color of her skin is. Because there were other people who were late to court who the judge did not really tell anything to, or simply let them off with a verbal warning. This lady was dressed for business, with her hair put up, wearing a blazer, business professional. And as he continued, basically letting her have it, the bailiff recognized the judge had done this several times before throughout the years that he was there. The court reporter, being an older white woman, had a private little notebook where she would write down every time the judge went off on one of these. And there was a pattern. So the young attorney let the judge finish. And when he was done, she then took out her prosecutor's badge and said, I am an assistant federal prosecutor. I was late because there was an immediate case, and she named the case, that I had to respond to before coming in here. Now I want you to know that there were so many other people who came in late and you told them nothing. Yet, as a young black woman, here I am, and you have fined me the most expensive fine, which is $500 for being late. Of course, everybody started paying attention, and even though you're not supposed to record, some recorded. A young attorney in the making taking notes. An older black man shedding a tear because he knew what that was like to experience. So she went on, and the judge said, well, I didn't know who you were. Let's just forget about the fine. And she said, no. That goes exactly with what I'm saying. The system that's in place is not working. I will pay the fine because it will serve as evidence of what's going on, the injustice that is occurring. And as more she opened her mouth, the more the judge tried making himself look as small as possible. When, in the beginning, he felt he was this big, powerful presence in the room. What resulted in that was an investigation into all his cases. And it was determined that he was very biased, particularly with females of color who were receiving the highest fines in his court, when others were not. Attorneys started calling her, sharing their stories along with other people around the city. So at the end of the day, the judge was given two options. Might not have been options he liked, but there were two options nonetheless. One, you resign and you save your reputation. Or two, you get dismissed from the bench. Which do you think he took? Stepping down on his own. But what resulted of that is a commission was formed, investigation continued, not only into his cases but other cases. And the judge came around to acknowledge his faults. He had prided himself in being the just judge that he could think of, saying, I do my part to be as equal as possible. He had not recognized the internal biases, the internal racism he embodied. And as a result, in then developing a program to teach other judges on anti-racism and biases, he spoke at these trainings from his personal experience. The bailiff in the courtroom was then trained to train other bailiffs in speaking out when there is an injustice. The court reporter freely shared all her notes from the years. Now, why am I talking about this? One, I don't care how much you say that you're not racist or biased. At the end of the day, we all have it embodied in us. It does not matter the color of our skin. We do know, whether you admit it or not, that depending on the color of your skin, more doors will open to you. And we also know that that goes for gender. Like, I know not to speak against women because I'm outnumbered in this room. And I'll easily get a purse or a book or a hymnal thrown at me. But we know that they are men, and I use the word loosely, who don't care and will demean women. We'll talk to them like a child. We'll expect them to serve them left and right, as if they were their housekeeper. See, but this young lady in the courtroom didn't raise her voice. She didn't throw a tantrum. She didn't lose control of herself. She kept her voice professional, her tone calm. And that was important because it only infuriated the judge even more that she was not responding to his demeanor. And sometimes that is the best way to respond to someone, because there's a difference between responding and reacting. As I was holding our confirmation class last Sunday, I talked to the boys about that. Reacting and responding. I want you to think of that. Do you know the difference between responding and reacting? Is it the same in your mind? Is it different? Have you experienced it? See, the best example I gave them was, for example, when you're sitting down and someone hits you right below your knee, what happens? Your foot kicks up. Most of the time, for most of us, I don't know about Kyle right now, gotta pick on you, Kyle. But most of the time, our leg jerks, right? That's a reaction. Now, if someone to tap on your lap right above your knee, you might not have that same reaction. So then it's up to you to respond, whether it hurt or not. And those are the two main differences. Most of the time, many people, and I've been there, we do the knee-jerk reaction. We react. Jesus is in front of Pilate, and he's not reacting, he's responding. Imagine if that would have gone differently, and Jesus would have reacted. Now, Pilate is not innocent in thinking, oh, I'm so neutral, I am just on the sidelines. Bull. He's not. And that goes back to the same mentality as like, well, I didn't say anything. I just didn't feel it was appropriate. So then you just allowed someone to get attacked left and right. Then you're just as guilty. Now, I'm not advocating harm to yourself. See, but just like the judge, we have to recognize the error of our ways. We have to then recognize where we have gone wrong and speak out against that. Jesus' ministry exemplifies active engagement. Jesus did not remain neutral in the face of suffering, but he confronted oppression and advocated for restoration. Imagine if Jesus was neutral this whole time. Would we even be in here right now? Would Christianity be alive? There are so many who think, well, Jesus didn't do that. Well, what Bible are you reading? Because the one I've read, Jesus was a big old hippie liberal, if we want to use today's terms. He was not for the status quo. He literally flipped tables. He got extremely upset when he saw people selling stuff inside his Father's house. How would you have felt if you pulled up to your parents' house and someone was holding a garage sale outside? And your parents are like, oh no. Now, I know that probably doesn't apply to Jews, because Jack would probably know and be kicking them out of the way. But what would happen? Or someone's inside their house organizing for an estate sale, and your parent is sitting right there, it's like, I have no idea what's going on. How would you feel? Would you be quiet about it and be like, hey, what's happening? Most of us would not be so pleasant about it. I know I wouldn't. Silence or neutrality in the presence of injustice aligns with the oppressors. As Martin Luther King Jr. reminds us, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. As Christ followers, we are called to embody his example defending the oppressed and striving for reconciliation. We embrace the transformative power of God's love and justice by rejecting fear and apathy. So you're asking, okay, so what? What can I do? Well, one, you can advocate for justice. Speak out against genocidal rhetoric or policies that target vulnerable populations. Support organizations working towards reconciliation, peace, and equity. I don't know about you, how many have Facebook, and I don't post on the Des Plaines community groups, but some of the stuff that's posted in there is just so vulgar. Now, some of it is great. It's like, hey, that's the humanity I want to see. But you have someone who's like, well, we need to make sure these homeless people are out of this area or that area. They need to be moved out of there. Instead of saying, how can we as a community come together and try to provide for them? Now, I know you as Christ Church have been doing your part, so it might not apply to you. But if a person being without a home bothers you that much, because you don't want the public library to look bad with people sleeping out in the front, then maybe you need to work towards resources for the city to find housing for those who are unhoused, for those who are lacking food, instead of just complaining that it looks bad. Humanize the marginalized. Counter dehumanizing narratives by amplifying the stories of those oppressed, listening with empathy and affirming their inherent dignity as bearers of God's image. Now, I will use an organization that we are actively supporting, and that is Exodus World Service. Many people feel more comfortable supporting them because it's for refugees. They've been vetted. But what if Exodus World Service was directly to help immigrants, whether documented or undocumented? What would that look like for you? Would you still be willing to help as much as you are? Because there's many in these communities that will not. You have not seen, like I have growing up in South Texas, families, yes, undocumentedly crossing the border with maybe a bag of all their belongings, and the 115-degree heat, walking through ranches where there's nothing but the water for the horses and the cows, and if you drink that because you're so thirsty, you will most likely die. What happens? How desperate must you be? But yet, political leaders and people around us will call them every name in the book. We forget to see them as part of God's image. You can also live the kingdom ethos, welcoming immigrants, supporting refugees, and stand alongside the oppressed. Challenge the local injustices and reflect Christ's love, truth, and justice values daily. Educate and engage. Learn about social issues. Share knowledge. Participate in advocacy efforts like writing to policymakers, attending peaceful protests, or voting for leaders who will uphold justice. Build inclusive communities. Create spaces of belonging and hospitality, fostering understanding and mutual respect across differences. And reflect the kingdom values daily. Demonstrate radical love, practice nonviolence, and make ethical choices that align with the teachings of Christ. Christ's kingdom offers hope amid oppression, calling us to action in the present. By pursuing justice, reconciliation, and healing, we reflect God's vision of a world where love and equity prevail. The Holy Spirit empowers us to stand boldly against oppression and extend hope to the marginalized. The divine strengthens us, assures us that God's truth will ultimately triumph. Through faithful action, we bring a glimpse of Christ's kingdom into our world, transforming hearts and systems alike. So here's your call to justice should you decide to follow it. Jesus stood firm before Pilate, embodying truth and justice even as it led to the cross. His courage challenges us to reflect on our lives. How can we stand boldly for truth and justice, even at a cost? Commit to living as active witnesses of peace and justice. Let your life testify to God's transformative love and serve as a beacon of hope. Together, we can work to a world where the values of Christ's kingdom, peace, justice, and truth become an ever-present reality. May the words spoken today and heard today sit in your heart, your mind, and your soul as you seek God's guidance. Amen.